Hello, everyone, and welcome to Philosophy. My name is Brian, and I'll be your instructor for this course. This is the online coronavirus version of an in person philosophy course. Today, we'll be talking about the first chapter of Introductory Lectures on Religious Philosophy, a book written by the Chair of Humanities and Philosophy in Laney College in Oakland, California, Amir Sabzevari. This first chapter will discuss some of the fundamental themes of philosophy, the fundamental themes of thinking about life, and trying to approach the irrevocable and unescapable questions of what it means to be a human being, such as what is love, what is death, what is thinking, what does it mean to live a meaningful life. And you'll note Professor Sabzevari doesn't claim himself as a professional or as an authority on these questions. And likewise, I don't claim myself to be an authority or a professional in regards to these questions. This chapter only tells a couple stories, and in these stories, should we be able to understand them, we can have perhaps more meaningful and profound perspectives on these inescapable questions that will assault us at some point in time in our lives. Keep in mind, though, that these questions will come at you at some point in time in your life. You may not be at a place now where these questions will interest you. So should you find these questions and these ideas uninteresting, my recommendation is to simply listen to them, remember them, and then at some point in time in your life when you find yourself in some kind of difficult experience, difficult relationship, or struggling with difficult emotions, use these stories and use these ideas as tools to understand what exactly it means to be human, why exactly we are destined to struggle. The first question that Professor Sabzevari opens, it's a relatively important question for a course such as this, which is, what is philosophy? Why study philosophy? Why ask questions? In response to this, the following story is given. It's about a fish called the salmon fish, and the salmon fish begins its life at the top of the river. It emerges from this egg and then goes down the river, goes with the flow, and finds itself at this pool of water. In this pool of water, a salmon is a very happy fish. Symbolically speaking, this is us in our relatively comfortable physical lives. This is us having every single thing that logically should bring human beings meaning, happiness, value, and purpose. Salmon has relationships. Salmon has Netflix. Salmon has nice dinner. Salmon has nice family. Salmon has walks in the morning. Salmon has job and money and so on and so forth. Every single thing that you and I, for most of our lives, will struggle to obtain, salmon has. But unfortunately, philosophy and human history and the story of the salmon fish tell us that there is something fundamentally wrong and broken about human beings, which is that no matter how much we have, no matter how much physical possessions, no matter how much we should be happy in this world, there is something fatally broken and condemned about the human being, which is that at some point in time in its life, it looks around and says, this is not my home. I don't belong here. Though I may have relationships, though I may have sex, though I may have drugs, though I may have movies and all the physical creature comforts that should bring us happiness and pleasure, I don't feel at home. And salmon does something rather strange at this point in time in its life. This is the beginning of philosophy. This is the point where Dante, at the age 39, looked around him and said, I find myself in the dark woods. I can't see forward, I can't see behind me, I can't see left, I can't see right, I see no way forward. And salmon does something that salmon should not do, which is it begins to go against the flow. It begins to redefine every single thing that once gave salmon fish meaning. It revolts, and it goes up against the river. Human being is destined to revolt. Human being is destined to have some kind of psychological revolution happen inside of our heads, where every single thing we once imagined to be right, true, correct, and ethical, all of a sudden is turned upside down and shaken 3 or 4 times until we realize that every single thing that we once thought to be true is in fact perhaps otherwise. And salmon goes against the flow, and it does this during springtime. The springtime has all of these bears escaping from hibernation, and all of these bears are there to do one thing and one thing only, which is to eat the salmon fish that are attempting to revolt attempting to do something that salmon are not supposed to do, which is to fly. Symbolically speaking, this is the negative emotions. This is the things that drag us back down into the lives that you and I are trying to escape on a daily basis. Now, make no mistake, this is talking about the fundamental psychological revolutions that we'll see in the heroes of humanity, the Socrateses and the Malcolm X, where they revolt not only against their families, not against their culture, but against life itself. But make no mistake, these small psychological revolutions happen on a smaller scale as well. For those of you that are trying to go through a breakup, for those of you that are trying to quit drinking, for those of you that are trying to quit virtually anything, whether it's a negative experience or being addicted to a negative emotion, this story relates to you, which is that now you have to struggle against every single thing that once brought your life meaning. The bears are the negative emotions. The bears are the people that once surrounded you and once gave you, to a certain extent, a degree of comfort. And for those of you that know anything about salmon, you realize that, as the Bhagavad Gita says, out of 10,000 people, there's one person that actually begins this struggle. Out of 10,000 people that do this struggle, only one actually survives and completes this journey. For salmon fish, the completion of this journey is to find itself in the very pool that it began its life. It lays a couple eggs, and it dies. These eggs, of course, sprout a couple more salmon fish, and out of these salmon fish, they're going to live their lives in forgetfulness, find themselves at the bottom of the pool, and then try to revolt. This is the fundamental story that defines human beings, and this is what philosophy is. To give a vivid illustration of what this actually looks like, because philosophy is not just a set of ideas. Philosophy is not just a set of abstractions that are just floating around in the air. Philosophy is not about assignments. Philosophy is not about quizzes. Philosophy is not about just reading books and spitting out information. Philosophy is about learning how to live life. Philosophy is about revolution. Philosophy is all about self-respect, learning how to live our lives in such a way and treat ourselves in such a way that we can't help but just respect the world around us. For those of you that struggle with difficult people in your lives, just recognize that we treat other people the way that we treat ourselves, and people that, maybe even politicians that don't treat others with the respect that they deserve, are just struggling with difficulties that, quite frankly, shouldn't really interest us. There's a short book that we've mentioned already, a short Indian book called Bhagavad Gita. It's perhaps about 20 chapters long, maybe about this thick, almost like a pamphlet. And Bhagavad Gita means Song of the Gods. And there was a man in the 19th century in America. He was white, like me. His name is Henry David Thoreau. And Henry David Thoreau was a condemned man, a man who was born to suffer, a man not like the rest of us. And the reason for this is the following. Henry David Thoreau was in love with his teacher's wife. Henry David Thoreau hated the educational system, began his own school, and in the first semester of that school that he started with his brother, made it through, I think, maybe a couple months of classes before his brother succumbed to illness and died in Henry David Thoreau's arms. So now we have a man who is completely shattered, who's in love with somebody that he can't have, who his only close family member just died in his arms, and who just, for the most part, finds life relatively unattractive. Now, where most of us in the Bay Area would find ourselves in this situation and perhaps do things that aren't necessarily philosophically profound or exceptionally meaningful, Henry David Thoreau does something rather strange. He just goes out into the woods and says, you know what, I'm sick of society, I'm sick of people, I've been disappointed by life itself, and now my philosophical journey begins, now my revolution begins, now it's truly time for me to revolt against life. And so he sits down and reads this small pamphlet of a book, the Bhagavad Gita. And he writes this book called On Walden, writes this book called Civil Disobedience. A couple of years later, there's this brown man. Nowadays we call him Mahatma Gandhi, but his name originally was not Mahatma Gandhi, it was just Gandhi. Mahatma means great soul, and most great souls are born and live out the beginning of their lives like tiny souls, just like the rest of us. And Gandhi, as his tiny soul uh, begins his life, he is brown, but he lives in England. And most of our lives are going to be defined by our environment. And so, like every person, I suppose, he wants to just fit in. He wants to be accepted. He wants to be loved. He wants to be seen and just enjoyed by other people. So he pretends that he's white. He walks white. He dances white. He talks white. Until something rather tragic happens to him at a very important juncture in his life. He's on a train, sitting in the first class section, and the conductor comes up to him and asks him, "What are you doing here?" And he pulls out the ticket from his pocket and gives it to them, and the conductor says, "No, what are you doing here? You don't belong here," and grabs him by the collar and throws him out of the train. And Gandhi, for the first time in his life, realized that he has been a little soul, realized that he's been a counterfeit human being, realized that he's gone with the flow, realized that he's accepted ethical norms that he himself neither created nor understood. And he sits down, looks at his body, looks at his culture, looks at his life, and says, "Oh my goodness, I've been living a lie." And for the first time, he realizes that he wants to become an Indian. He wants to take the ancestral history that's been put upon his shoulder and actually live through it. And so he reads Henry David Thoreau's works, reads Civil Disobedience, and simply just goes back to his roots. Realizes that there's a really, really profound history sitting a few generations behind him, single-handedly throwing out the entire British Empire from his home country simply by virtue of himself living a meaningful life. A couple decades later, maybe a couple years later, there's a black man by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dad beat him. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke in a way that most human beings will never speak. Martin Luther King Jr. obviously had a tremendous amount of feelings. If you look at the lives of these people, Thoreau, Gandhi, MLK, these people have a life that is that's not easy. Happiness is not in their lot. They're not born to just be regular human beings like the rest of us. They're born to revolt. They're born to feel. They're born to suffer. They're born to be condemned. And the rest of us benefit from the meaning that they find in their suffering. MLK reads Gandhi's works. MLK reads Thoreau's works. MLK goes up to give a speech, and he's written the speech out, and then he throws the speech away and gives the most inspiring speech that has ever escaped human lips. An entire generation of African Americans have self-respect because of one man's suffering, because of one man's revolution, because of one man's ability to learn how to deal with pain, suffering, and the journey towards living a meaningful life. This is philosophy. This is revolution. This is what it means to be mature. This is what it means to be human, but keep in mind the price that people pay for taking ideas and philosophy seriously. Thoreau lived most of his life alone. Gandhi was killed by his own people. MLK sacrificed his own life, and you'll see this fundamental story repeating itself over and over and over and over again. One person stops living through their physical life, has some kind of philosophical revolution, like Dante, like Socrates, like all of these people, journeys towards some place, we don't really know where this place is, finds some meaning there, and then the rest of us don't really like it that much. It offends us. I think it was Nietzsche, the great German philosopher, that said that we killed Jesus just because he made us look so bad. And then, a couple generations later, we read their works and try to understand how exactly we can fit into this strange puzzle called life through the GPS that is given to us by these great giants of human beings. Black, white, brown, Indian, American, it doesn't really matter. Human beings are born with some fundamental flaws, some fundamental questions that will assault us at some point in time in our lives. Now, I don't know you because we're in the midst of coronavirus shutdowns and I'll probably never see you face to face. But I can guess that you're no Socrates. I can guess you're no Malcolm X. I can guess you're no MLK. Which means that, for the most part, you and I are not going to live and die for ideas. You and I are just learning how to, make it through an online class. We're not learning how to, revolt against the fundamental essence of life. Which makes it so that our lives are a little bit more simple than the lives of Thoreau, Gandhi, and all of these people. And to address this more simplistic life, or rather more, I suppose, normal life, Professor Sabzevaria opens some different stages that we encounter in human life. These are called the iron, bronze, silver, and gold stages. If you look at the people that we're going to be discussing throughout this semester, they're in the gold stage. You and I are in the stages called iron, bronze, and silver. What are these stages? How can we move from stage to stage? What is the different meaning that we find in these stages? And how does language, how does education, how does reading and writing work on each of these different stages? The first stage is called the iron stage, and it's all about pleasures. Simple, physical pleasures that are normal to want. You and I have physical bodies. These physical bodies are equipped with all sorts of pleasure neurons and nerves and all of these things on our body that, when excited, just release all of these chemicals into our brains and just fill us with happiness, pleasure, and meaning. This is a sort of 18-year-old, or I suppose teenage definition of American pleasures and happiness, which is that to be living a meaningful life is to just be happy. And there's nothing wrong with this. The only thing that's wrong with it is that this pleasure lasts for maybe 15 minutes, maybe a couple days, maybe a year, maybe a couple years. But nevertheless, we find ourselves asking some fundamental questions again, which is, I've been doing the same thing over and over and over again, like Groundhog Day. And yet the meaning that I once found in the beginning is different than the meaning that I find now. I find myself doing things out of habit, not because they actually bring me meaning, purpose, and value. Our American quests towards pleasure and happiness begin as these things, begin as just casual pleasures, but ultimately they end with us running away from pain through pleasure. And I think some of us, maybe not in the American culture, because the American culture is, for the most part, revolves entirely around the iron stage of life. But some of us escape this, some of us revolt against this and find ourselves in the bronze stage of life. Bronze is about money, bronze is about job, bronze is about power. Bronze is about walking into a room and making sure people respect you and know your name. Bronze is about paying rent and utilities. Bronze is about making sure you can give back to your family the things that they've given to you for the first 20 years of your life. You're not looking for meaning or purpose or value for your job, you're looking for a paycheck. For the most part, this is where us as college students are, which is that we're in college because we want to get a good grade. We want to use this grade to transfer. We want to transfer to get a good BA. We want to get a BA so we can have a relatively decent job, and this is a good, necessary, valuable stage in life where we want to have a degree and be able to just have a relatively comfortable life, and this is good. The only problem is that if you haven't psychologically graduated from the iron stage, what you'll do is you'll take all of the currency that you acquire through the bronze stage, all of the money that you have from your job or from your degree or whatever the case may be, and spend it down in iron. So if you haven't graduated from iron, but you find yourself physically, socially, financially in bronze, you will take all of the things that you get in bronze and then just spend it right down in iron. The only good graduation, the only real meaningful graduation, is to go from iron to bronze and make sure that you walk cleanly away from this life. The third stage in life is called silver. This is more about living a social life. Iron and bronze are extremely selfish, extremely normal places to be at in life, but at some point in time in our life we realize that we want to share things with a companion. We want to have a life that's built upon stories that are meaningful. Not just stories about memories that we have, but real, genuine, good relationships. And this is silver. This is about not necessarily just having a relationship for a night or having a relationship because you're lonely, but having a relationship because you really, really want a meaningful marriage. Having a marriage because you want to see like the physical reflection of this marriage in your children. You want to build a life and share a life with somebody else. This is about marriage, this is about kids, this is about in-laws and outlaws, this is about respecting your parents, this is about building a home with somebody. The tragedy of these three stages is that as you mature through these stages, as you mature through life, you just lose things. The more that you care about something, the more meaningful your life is, the more difficult your life is. For those of you that find ease and pleasure in life, enjoy it. You're in your house of privilege. Have a good time, because as you progress through the stages in life, it will become more difficult to find meaning in the things that define our lives. For example, the definition of relationship that you have as an 18-year-old or a 25-year-old is going to be very different from the definition and demands that you have from a relationship at the age 30 or 35 and 40. And if you try to use the tools that you've established in relationships at the age 18 and apply them to relationships at 30, you'll come to realize you are falling short. You have no idea how to deal with the difficulties of a long-term, meaningful relationship. For example, if you try to take your iron friends and bring them up to the silver level, you come to realize that your friends in iron don't understand a meaningful relationship. Your friends in iron, even if you take them to the bronze stage, don't understand you wanting to sit down on a Monday night and just read a book that's a little bit more meaningful than all the pleasures that once defined your life in the iron stage. And these friendships actually become some of the bears that you find in the salmon story. They'll try to drag you back down to iron. They'll try to drag you back down into bronze and say, you know what? Why don't we just have a good time like we used to? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And you say, look it, I'm not there anymore. And out of 100 friends, maybe one will understand intellectually, but they'll never be able to follow you into these stages. As the Confucian Chinese philosopher Confucius says, you can't make the grass grow by pulling on it. And most of the time, we just leave our friends behind if we want to psychologically mature through these stages in life. This is ultimately the task of philosophy. How to move through these stages, how to achieve psychological maturity, how to read and write and listen and respect in a way that actually makes our life and our death more meaningful. The gold stage is reserved for the Socrateses, the Malcolm X, the people in life that give their life for ideas. And we'll talk about them because their lives are like a complete map of the human journey, and we can find ourselves in each of these different stages. If you have a little bit of a smaller GPS, you'll be a little bit more confused, but if Malcolm X is your GPS, clarity will be your friend. But make no mistake, with clarity comes difficulties. With ideas comes difficulties. With taking things seriously, with genuinely caring about something, comes difficulties. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to this course, and I sincerely hope that you find some kind of value or meaning throughout the next few weeks of philosophy.